Tim Kirby Russia hot takes. The Chinese say that they want to work with the Russians to promote real democracy. So yeah, according to Bloomberg, the Chinese have this concept where they want to promote a style of democracy that's a lot more diverse and that it should meet up with a nation's own sort of history and background. They also mentioned that they are very tired of the West monopolizing the concept of democracy. And if you're watching this channel, you probably are too. But so for any of you guys who may not know what I'm referring to, if you haven't noticed, generally the West, say Washington, London, Brussels, if leader of country X does what they want, they're democratic enough. If they don't do what they want, they are not democratic. Or they could be weird. I remember a couple years ago that Viktor Orban was an evil, anti-democratic dictator, but now that there's a war on with Russia and they want to keep him in the EU, all those sort of conversations have vanished. So in a lot of ways, this whole idea of who's democratic and who isn't has become this sort of like manipulative labeling system that isn't really based on anything. And speaking of an idea that isn't really based on anything, democracy is very, very vague. I know for some of you, you feel that democracy is this extremely concrete, specific set of ideas. But when you've lived in Russia that has had sort of two very different forms of democracy, you can see there's a little bit of diversity here. So if we go back a little ways in history, in the Soviet Union, they were absolutely sure that they lived in a form of democracy. And to be honest, the Germans in the 1930s also felt that they lived in a form of democracy. How can that be? Were they just lying to the public, or was this some sort of weird mind games? Well, the reason for that is that in the real root of essentially what really is a democracy is it's a system where the state gets its power, its justification for existence from the people and not from God. That is like the big difference between the government of the 13 colonies that became the United States and the government of King George there in England, is that for a very, very long time, divine right was good enough justification for some sort of nation state, principality, or whatever to exist. So that's kind of the first layer of democracy there. And the Soviet Union, the Third Reich, and the Western-style democracies, all of them do not rule by divine right. Although sometimes we might feel the opposite. Our leaders sometimes might feel very inspired by an evil divine right. But anyways, even in the Soviet Union, when they were talking about democracy, Stalin made a point that I'm going to paraphrase because I'm terrible with quotes. He basically said, how much freedom can you have if you're flat broke? That was a big sort of argument of why their Soviet system was good, because in the Soviet system, everyone had a job, everyone would have a bit of money in their pockets. There was really no homelessness. Then again, Soviet homes, did you really want to live in Stalin-era housing? That's up to you. But the thing is, there were plenty of counterpoints that were made by Stalin, later Khrushchev at the UN, and so on and so forth, that the Soviet system gave people these sort of minimum things that they needed to live. Thus, it gave them freedom, and thus it was somehow a democratic system, because regardless of however voting works, the leadership reflected the will of the people. So long story short, in the 20th century, there were some competing views on democracy. And now in the 21st century, it looks like that's going to happen again. So guys, as we're marching into the multipolar world that is happening pretty quickly right before our eyes, we shouldn't be surprised that a lot of countries, the great civilizations of our planet, don't really want to have one particular group of people throwing across this democratic label all over the place. They want to have their own unique interpretation of democracy, possibly because that suits their own interests, but also because that's an aspect of freedom, right? Because if you can't make any decisions, or especially if you don't have the right to hold that golden label of who's democratic or who's not, then you're always going to be kind of a second-class global civilization, aren't you? So anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video and you like the opinions coming out of my big fat mouth, then join up on my Telegram channel. That's Tim Kirby Hardcore on Telegram. Link, of course, in the description.